For centuries, many have questioned or even ignored the presence of black people in the Bible. But the truth has always been there, woven into Scripture by the very hand of God. If you've ever wondered about the origins of black people in the biblical narrative, you're not alone. The enemy thrives on misinformation, but when the truth is revealed, it has the power to reshape how we see ourselves and God's divine plan for all nations. The Bible holds clear evidence that Africa and its people were not on the sidelines of history, but at the center of God's unfolding story. From the creation of mankind to the powerful rulers and believers who played key roles in biblical events, their presence is undeniable. By the end of this video, you won't just know these facts. You'll understand their significance and how they reveal the unity of all people in God's purpose. And at the end, I'll share an example of how embracing this truth has transformed perspectives, restoring a deeper sense of identity and purpose. Are you ready to uncover what has always been there? Let's dive into biblical facts about the origin of black people. In the beginning, God created the first man, Adam, and the first woman, Eve. He made them in his own image, giving them life and the ability to rule over the earth. From these two, every nation, tribe, and people came into existence. When sin entered the world, people began to spread out, but their hearts turned away from God. This led to the Great Flood, a time when God chose to restart humanity through one man and his family, Noah. Noah, his wife, and their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, along with their wives, were the only ones saved in the ark, and from them all the people of the world came. After the flood, Noah's sons became the fathers of different groups of people. Shem's descendants became the people of the Middle East, including the Israelites. Japheth's family spread to Europe and other distant lands. Ham's descendants settled in parts of Africa and Canaan. Each of these families multiplied, forming different nations, speaking different languages, and living in different lands. Though their skin colors and cultures became diverse, they all shared one origin, Noah, and ultimately Adam. This means that no matter how different people may look, they all belong to the same human family created by God. God confused the languages of the people at the Tower of Babel, causing them to scatter across the earth. Before this event, everyone spoke the same language and worked together. But in their pride, they tried to build a tower reaching to the heavens, hoping to make a name for themselves. God saw their pride and caused them to speak different languages so they could no longer understand one another. This led to the birth of different nations and cultures, each developing its own ways of life. Yet, despite the differences, God remained the creator of all people, watching over the spread of nations according to his perfect plan. As people spread across the world, their bodies adapted to their surroundings. Some lived in hot, sunny places where their skin became darker to protect them from the sun's strong rays. Others lived in colder regions where their skin remained lighter. Over time, these small changes made people look different, but they never changed the truth that they were all made by the same God. Whether dark-skinned, light-skinned, or somewhere in between, all people carried the same breath of life given by God and the same value in his eyes. No one was more special than the other, for all were made in his image. After the Great Flood, Noah's sons began to have children, and their families grew into nations. One of Noah's sons, Ham, had a son named Cush, who became the ancestor of a mighty people. Cush's descendants settled in lands that later became known as Ethiopia, Sudan, and other parts of Africa. The Bible often speaks of the land of Cush as a place of great strength, wealth, and wisdom. Cush's children became rulers, warriors, and builders of great civilizations, leaving a mark on history that cannot be erased. The presence of Cush and his descendants in the Bible shows that Africa has been part of God's plan from the very beginning. The name Cush appears many times in the Bible, always referring to a land known for its dark-skinned people. One of the most well-known descendants of Cush was Nimrod, described as a mighty warrior and the first great king on the earth. He established some of the most powerful early cities, including Babylon and Nineveh. This shows that Cush's family was not only strong, but also had a great influence on the world's early civilizations. These nations built impressive cities and developed cultures that shaped history. Though people often overlook the role of Africa in biblical times, Cush's story proves that African nations were present from the very beginning of human history. The prophets of the Bible spoke about Cush with both respect and prophecy. The prophet Isaiah described the land of Cush as a place of tall, smooth-skinned people, a land beyond the rivers where mighty men lived. This description fits what history tells us about the great African civilizations that arose in these regions. Cush was not just a land of distant people, but was mentioned in God's plans for the nations. When Israel suffered, people from Cush sometimes came to their aid, showing that Africa had connections with God's chosen people. This reminds us that biblical history is not just about one group of people, but about how God worked through many nations. In ancient times, the people of Cush were known for their wisdom and strength in battle. They had skilled archers, fast-running messengers, and kings who ruled with great power. Even the mighty Egyptians, who built the pyramids and ruled over much of the ancient world, respected the Cushites. In fact, there was a time when Cushite rulers even sat on the throne of Egypt, showing how powerful and influential they were. The Bible speaks of Cush as a land of wealth and trade, a place where people brought gifts of gold, spices, and rare goods. These details show that Africa was not an isolated place, but was deeply connected to the rest of the world through trade, culture, and history. Throughout the Bible, Cush and its people are never ignored. In fact, some of God's greatest promises include the people of Cush. The Psalms speak of a day when Cush will stretch out its hands to God, and the prophet Zephaniah mentions that people from beyond the rivers of Cush will bring offerings to the Lord. This shows that God's plan of salvation was never just for one nation, but for all. The people of Cush, like all people, were created by God and invited to be part of His great story. The presence of Cush in the Bible reminds us that no nation is forgotten in God's eyes, and Africa has always had a special place in the unfolding of history. Throughout the Bible, there are individuals from Africa who played important roles in God's plan. These figures were not minor or forgotten. They were placed in key moments of history, showing that God works through people from every nation. One such person was Ebed-Melech, an Ethiopian official who served in the palace of King Zedekiah of Judah. When the prophet Jeremiah was thrown into a muddy cistern, left to die, it was Ebed-Melech who stepped forward to rescue him. He risked his position and possibly his life to help God's prophet, showing great courage and compassion. Because of his faithfulness, God later promised to protect him when Jerusalem was destroyed. This act of bravery shows that God does not judge people by their nationality, but by their faithfulness to Him. Another well-known African figure in the Bible is the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in the book of Acts. He was a high-ranking official serving the Queen of Ethiopia and had traveled to Jerusalem to worship God. As he was returning home, he was reading from the book of Isaiah, but did not fully understand its meaning. God sent Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, to explain the scriptures to him. When he finally understood that Jesus was the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, he eagerly asked to be baptized. Right there, by the side of the road, Philip baptized him, and the Ethiopian eunuch became one of the first recorded African converts to Christianity. His story shows that the message of salvation reached Africa early, proving that the gospel was never meant for just one group of people. Africa was not just a place of individual believers. It also played a role in shaping major events in biblical history. When Jesus was a child, his life was in danger because King Herod sought to kill him. To keep him safe, God instructed Joseph and Mary to take the baby Jesus and flee to Egypt. Egypt, a land in Africa, became a place of refuge for the Savior of the world. This was not the first time Egypt had provided shelter for God's people. Centuries earlier, during a terrible famine, Jacob's family found safety in Egypt because of Joseph's wisdom and leadership. Though Egypt later became a place of oppression for the Israelites, it was also a land where God's purposes were fulfilled. Even in times of suffering, Africans were present in the biblical story. When Jesus was carrying his heavy cross to Golgotha, weakened by beatings and exhaustion, the Roman soldiers forced a man named Simon of Cyrene to help him. Cyrene was a region in North Africa, meaning Simon was likely of African descent. Though at first he was forced into this task, he became a witness to Jesus' suffering in a way few others did. Many believe that this moment changed his life, and his family later became followers of Christ. Simon's presence at the cross reminds us that people from every nation were involved in the story of redemption, even in Jesus' final hours before his crucifixion. Moses, the great leader of Israel, had a wife who was a Cushite, meaning she came from the land of Cush, which is often associated with Ethiopia or Sudan. The Bible mentions this in Numbers 12:1, where Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own siblings, spoke against him because of his Cushite wife. They questioned his authority, but God immediately stepped in to defend Moses. This moment was not just about family jealousy. It revealed how God saw all people as equal, regardless of their background or skin color. By choosing a Cushite woman to be part of the life of Israel's greatest prophet, God showed that his plan was never limited to just one race or nation. Moses' marriage to a Cushite woman was significant because it challenged the thinking of that time. Many ancient societies were divided by tribes and nations, often looking down on those who were different. When Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses for marrying a foreign woman, they were likely influenced by these divisions. But God made it clear that he does not judge people based on where they come from. Instead of punishing Moses, he punished Miriam by striking her with leprosy, making her skin white as snow. This act was a powerful lesson, showing that no one should look down on others because of their race or nationality. God's rebuke of Miriam proved that he accepts people from every background when they walk in his ways. The story of Moses and his Cushite wife also highlights the role of African women in biblical history. This woman was not just an ordinary person. She was connected to one of the greatest leaders of all time. Although the Bible does not give many details about her, the simple mention of her existence speaks volumes. It shows that African women were present in the story of God's people, woven into the very fabric of biblical events. Many times, history overlooks women, especially those from distant lands, but God does not forget anyone. By including her in the Bible, he reminds us that his plan involves all nations and all people. Marriage in biblical times was more than just a relationship between two people. It often represented unity between families and nations. The fact that Moses, the leader of Israel, had a wife from Cush symbolized a connection between the Israelites and the African nations. This was not the first time Africa and Israel had such ties. Joseph had married an Egyptian woman, and later, African rulers and warriors played key roles in biblical history. The marriage of Moses to a Cushite woman further reinforced the idea that God's plan was bigger than one nation, and he was bringing people from all backgrounds into his purpose. God's defense of Moses in this situation sends a strong message that he does not tolerate discrimination among his people. The punishment of Miriam was not just about her attitude toward Moses. It was about the lesson that no one should judge others based on where they come from. God values the heart, not the outward appearance. This truth is seen throughout the Bible, from the calling of Abraham to the teachings of Jesus. Throughout the Bible, Africa is not just mentioned in passing. It is often included in God's prophecies and blessings for the nations. The land of Cush, Egypt, and other African regions are spoken of in ways that show their importance in God's divine plan. One of the most beautiful promises concerning Africa is found in Psalm 68:31, which says, "Princes shall come out of Egypt, Cush shall soon stretch out her hands to God." This verse paints a picture of African nations turning to the Lord, lifting their hands in worship and being part of his great kingdom. It reveals that from the beginning, God had a place for Africa in his salvation story. The prophet Zephaniah also spoke about Africa in his writings. In Zephaniah 3:10, he prophesied that people from beyond the rivers of Cush would bring offerings to God. This is significant because in ancient times, people from different nations would bring gifts as a sign of respect and worship. This prophecy suggests that Africans would not only acknowledge the true God, but would play an active role in serving him. History confirms this truth, as Christianity took deep roots in Africa, particularly in Ethiopia and Egypt. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, showing how this prophecy has already been fulfilled in many ways. The Bible also speaks of great African rulers who had encounters with God's people. One of the most famous was the Queen of Sheba, who traveled from her distant land to visit King Solomon. She came with gifts of gold, spices, and precious stones, eager to test Solomon's wisdom. When she saw his great wisdom and the glory of his kingdom, she praised the God of Israel. Her visit was not just about curiosity. It was a sign that God's wisdom and blessings were reaching far beyond Israel. The Queen of Sheba's story proves that African leaders recognized the power of the God of Israel and sought his wisdom. Even in the New Testament, Africa remained central to God's unfolding plan. As the gospel spread after Jesus' resurrection, African believers played a key role in shaping the early church. Simon of Cyrene, the Ethiopian eunuch, and many others helped to carry the message of Jesus across their lands. Church history tells us that some of the most influential Christian thinkers, like Augustine of Hippo and Tertullian, came from Africa. These men defended the Christian faith, wrote powerful teachings, and helped shape the beliefs of the church. Their contributions show that Africa was not just a place that received the gospel, it was a place that helped spread and strengthen it. God's promises concerning Africa remind us that his love and salvation are for all people, no matter where they come from. The Bible never presents Africa as an afterthought, but as a key part of God's plan. From prophecies about nations worshipping him to real historical figures who played important roles, Africa has always had a place in the biblical story. The inclusion of African people and lands in the Bible is a powerful reminder that no nation is forgotten in God's eyes. His plan of salvation includes everyone, and his desire is for all people, whether from Israel, Africa, or anywhere else, to come to him and receive his blessings.